actually regret not putting it on my favorites list. An incredibly violent book wormed its way into my brain. I've never eaten a person, but today I might. I'm honestly kind of itching for a reread. I have not been able to get it out of my head. You could say I'm somewhat of an expert. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I want to recommend you some more weird and disturbing literary fiction books. So if you haven't already seen part 1, I will link it down in the description. It's not like you necessarily need to see part 1, but if you clicked on this video, it's clear that you like weird and disturbing literature. So go watch part 1 if you want to as well. So just as last time, I have 8 recommendations, and this is just part 2 of the video. I have a part 3 and a part 4 already cooking as well. So you could say I'm somewhat of an expert when it comes to weird and disturbing literature. It's probably my favorite thing to read, so I am kind of a professional. So the first book is one I haven't ever talked about on the channel yet, and it has haunted me since I finished it. And I finished it at the very end of 2024, and I actually regret not putting it on my favorites list. That's how much it's sort of wormed its way into my brain. But that is Ava's Man by Gayl Jones. The story opens with Ava, who has recently been imprisoned for murdering a man. Throughout the course of the novel, we're reflecting back on her relationship with this man and sort of how men have interacted with her throughout the entire course of her life since she was a child. And in many ways, it's examining how the world not only fails young girls and women, but especially fails young people of color and young women of color. This is an incredibly violent book, but I would say that it's not super in your face, and it's subtle in a way that really gets under your skin and is just really disturbing. So one thing that was really unique about this book is that the narrative structure is very disorienting. We'll learn about one of the various traumas that Ava has endured in her life, and then literally it's not even like it'll get broken up, like this paragraph will be about this scenario and then the next paragraph will be about the next scenario. It like changes from sentence to sentence. Like one sentence she's like in the present, and then the next sentence she's referring back to a trauma she already talked about. And at first I was really confused by this, and my immediate reaction was to not like it. But since I finished this book, that has really haunted me. And I think it's because the really fragmented, disorienting narrative structure is one of the best representations of trauma that I've ever seen in literature, because not everything is linear and nice and clean and neatly packaged into these memories when you are traumatized, especially someone who is as traumatized as Ava was. So now I'm honestly kind of itching for a reread. I'm really wanting to purchase my own copy so I can annotate it, because I imagine that this is going to be even better on a reread. So I think if any of those things sound intriguing, you should read this, but be aware there are a lot of very intense moments in this. There's a lot of violence, so I would check content warnings and, take care of yourselves. Next is one that I recently picked up in a book haul. I'm really trying to prioritize my physical TBR because it seems like it's just growing and I really want to keep it under control. So I figure, you just bought these books, let's get her done. Let's read these. So that is It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Marcken. This is another one where when I first finished it, it was like, 3.5 stars, but I have not been able to get it out of my head. It is so bizarre. So this is about a woman who is dead and sort of in this purgatory. She's sort of in this like undead limbo. And what I didn't realize when I started this is that this is pretty much like a zombie story, but it's like a literary fiction zombie story where the zombie remembers her life when she was alive. And she has forgotten some parts, but the parts of her soul that remember her loved ones still carries that grief of loss. So I thought that was such an interesting perspective, and while this wasn't like a total 5-star slam dunk for me, there were just so many lines that really stood out to me. I thought the prose was really pretty, and after thinking on it, I did like how this ended. I can't hear anything but the chat 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 rattle of the sprinklers, and I can't see anything, but it doesn't matter. I know the living are nearby, but it doesn't matter. The hunger is there, but that doesn't even matter, because I am floating on the late summer smell of grass. I am 6 years old and my father is holding my wrists in his hand and is spinning, swinging me in a circle. He is the center. My body flies out from him. I am a flag, a ribbon, a blur of light. My hair flies out. My feet fly out. My wrists sting in his grip. My arms will pull out of their sockets. I will arc out across the lawn in the uncut field and farther from the roofed box of our house, higher and higher above it all. Trees and roads growing smaller and smaller below. And near the apex of my arc, I will exit the atmosphere into cold, silent orbit. But he slows and I float down. My knees bump the lawn and are stained green. I try to stand and the earth tilts. I reel sideways like a drunk and fall. The grass is cool. I can't stop laughing. I can't stop crying. I am lying on my back in the long grass of the old golf course crying, except I can't cry. It is unbearable. Nothing Can Hurt You by Nichola Goldberg is about the death of a young woman, and each chapter is a different vignette from the point of view of someone who is connected to the woman or the case in some way. So the connection could be someone as close as a relative of the woman, the boyfriend of the woman, or someone more far removed, like one of the police officers on her murder case. Someone who met her a single time, someone who you would hardly consider an acquaintance. And we never get the point of view of the girl who was murdered. So we're really having to construct this image of this girl from all of these different points of view. And I loved how this book built up the young woman's identity through the eyes of other people. I hesitate to call this a thriller because it's not like your traditional, like, oh, someone was murdered and we have to figure out who did it. It's more about memory and how people are remembered and the impact that people have on other people. What really excited me about reading this book, which is a book I actually read in a single sitting, was the epigraph. A soft light rising above the level meadow behind the bed. He takes her in his arms. He wants to say, I love you, nothing can hurt you. But he thinks this is a lie. So he says in the end, you're dead, nothing can hurt you. Which seems to him a more promising beginning, more true. So I think that perfectly sets the tone for this novel, and I don't see anyone else talking about this, so I think you should read it. Paradais by Fernanda Melchor is about two men in this luxury housing complex. One of them lives in the housing complex with his parents, and the other one works in the housing complex. So this is an exploration of class and male capacity for violence and how misogyny crosses class barriers. We are reading about toxic masculinity, male anger, and pretty brutal violence against women. So I would say this one's not for the faint of heart. It is really short, but if you've never read a Fernanda Melchor novel before, she has no indentations, no page breaks. She has these huge run-on sentences, which I think can be kind of overwhelming when you first start reading it because you kind of feel like you never get a break. But especially with this type of novel where it is so intense and such an uncomfortable topic, I think it's like Fernanda Melchor's way of kind of forcing our face into it and forcing us to not look away. Because while this is fiction, this is fictionalizing issues that are very pervasive and have real world consequences for people all around the world. So I don't know why I just got up on my soapbox there at the end, but that's all to say that her structure of how she writes the prose can be a little intimidating. Some people really don't like that, but I think if you can get over that, this is so good. This was jaw-dropping, crazy social commentary. I liked it a lot, and I think you should read it if you can. Motherthing by Ainslie Hogarth is about a woman whose mother-in-law dies and starts to haunt her house. This was marketed as a horror, which I don't think was the correct thing to do. It is really more literary fiction. What I remember most distinctly is that the main character is this very bizarre woman. It's like she's like a weird girly who's trying to be a normie, and no matter how much she tries to be like the perfect other housewives, the more it backfires. So I just loved being from the point of view of this weird lady. I also liked the conversations that this book had about depression and grief, especially grieving someone you had a complicated relationship with. I find that very interesting. I could have loved you so much, Laura, you stupid f***ing asshole, but you just couldn't do it. You were just too mean, sucking everything pleasant from a room. The private alarm of losing track of a spider on your ceiling. that was what it felt like to be in a room with you. We change into our pajamas as soon as we get home because that's what we always do. No matter who's haunting the basement, a precious custom from our old life that we've managed to preserve here in hell. It's going to be okay, because there's logic to a ghost, rules and methods for getting rid of one, unlike depression, for which there is nothing but stubborn despair. So this is a really good one. I love how it devolves into chaos at the end, and it's weird. I think you should read it. Next is one that I've recommended before, but it felt wrong to not include this on this list. That is Open Throat by Henry Hoke. This is about a gay mountain lion who lives in the Hollywood Hills and is forced out of their home because of climate change. And I think that this is a very timely read with what is happening with the wildfires in California right now. That's literally what happens in this book. And climate change forces this lion to go and intermingle with humans more closely. This is again a non-human or outsider's perspective on humans and the human condition, which I find to be so refreshing and funny and enlightening. There is something kind of melancholy about this book too, which I enjoyed, because the mountain lion is questioning their own existence and sort of the meaning of their life as well. So this is very, very short. You can definitely read it in one sitting. It is so good. To give you a perspective, the first chapter of this book is titled, "I've never eaten a person, but today I might." So I think you should read this, guys. Monstrilio by Gerardo Sámano Córdova is another one that is exploring grief. We are following a family after the death of their 11-year-old son, and the mother carves out a piece of the son's lung after hearing of this folk tale where if you nurture a piece of someone who has died, they might come back to life. And indeed, in nurturing the lung, something like her son is born, but it also has some of these beastly, monstrous tendencies. So this is very much influenced by Frankenstein. I think we have 4 or 5 parts of this book from different points of view as this little monster grows and is trying to force himself into the shape and behavior that is their dead son. This is very heartbreaking in many ways, very poignant, another melancholy read, but it's weird. So that is why it's on this list, and I think you should read it. Uncle Luke is sleeping when I get back home. I wade through the shadows of our living room, hoping to find monsters. Chat with them, laugh. But there are no monsters in these shadows, only me. Monstrilio once fell from the roof in the garden Poppy built for him. Splat, all the way down to the tiled floor. 3 stories. He hit himself on a platform's edge coming down, too. The pain was sharp, but brief. He was squishy, filled with dark goo. Nothing in him could break. And my last pick for this list is Jane, a Murder by Maggie Nelson. Maggie Nelson is a poet, so this novel has a very unconventional narrative structure where it's told mainly through these short vignettes and poems. This is about Maggie Nelson's aunt who was murdered, and it was never solved who murdered her. So the book is really about the case somewhat, but it's mostly about the family's reaction to it and the aftermath of her aunt's passing. This is one where I had a physical copy and I sold it, and I deeply regret selling it. So I actually think I'm going to buy it again or see if I can find it secondhand somewhere, because this one has just really stuck with me, and I loved the very unconventional narrative structure and the telling of a story through various poems and little vignettes. Okay guys, that is it. Those are 8 literary fiction recommendations that I think are weird and or disturbing in one way or another. If you have read any of these books or want to read any of these books, let me know. Did you love them? Did you hate them? Do you have any recommendations similar to these that you think I should read? Would love to hear them. Let me know. So thank you for watching this. You can watch my other videos if you want. You can like this video. You could subscribe. I love you guys very much. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.